Okay, today's date is November 2nd, 2003. We're here in Torrance, California, conducting an interview with Marty Higgins. On camera is Robert Horsting. On audio and catalog is Sam Imai. And interviewing is Stephen Wasserman. First, want to just thank you very much, Marty, for allowing us to interview you.
A pleasure.
I'm going to first ask you to please state your full legal name, your date of birth, and where you were born.
Martin Joseph Higgins, Jr., born 1/29/16 in Jersey City, New Jersey. How am I doing so far?
Great. Now, can you actually tell me a little bit about, Jersey City, what it was like when you were growing up?
Well, it was an interesting city. There was a hill where the Irish lived, and it ran north and south. And the Irish were either lace curtain or shanty. And my mother had me convinced we were lace curtain. On the bottom of both sides, the Italians lived. And actually, I fought with Italians in grammar school. And when I went to high school, I met Mike Rossinello, and his family owned a bakery. And I realized they were cultured people. There were 6 kids, and each one played an instrument. And the first time they had me for dinner, I thanked them. I said, that was great. Well, that was the first course of pasta. And we ate for 4 or 5 hours. And when we finished, the kids all played classical music. So I realized that the Irish were completely wrong about the Italians. That was the beginning to me of realizing that it's people, not, what would you call it? Help me. Not the nations, it's the people that count. People that count. I'm not expressing myself clearly, but that's what I mean. It's not who you are, it's what you are.
Great. Now, you were saying lace curtains. Can you explain to me what you meant by some of those terms?
Lace curtain was Irish, and it was not economics. It was something it was an attitude. In fact, most of my friends, there was one German in the neighborhood, mostly were Irish, and the shanty Irish went to Keansburg, New Jersey, and we never went to Keansburg, New Jersey, because we were lace curtain Irish. My mother had me convinced. And it's an attitude really of pride. I guess it's prejudice as well. But I grew up thinking I was lace curtain Irish. And I said the economics did not enter into it at all, whether you had money or not. It was attitude.
So can you actually describe the attitude for me and what it was that really defined being lace curtain?
Lace curtain, as far as I'm concerned, my mother had me convinced that we were lace curtain. You didn't question it. The strange part about it is my mother and father were both born in Jersey City. They never ever talked about their parents. I knew nothing about my grandparents at all. In fact, they were all dead by the time I was born. And I came up through the Depression, but actually I never suffered. My father worked in the Jersey City post office, in the main post office, and so we never went through what my wife went through. Marjorie's father was in the brick business, construction, and of course there was no building going on, so they really suffered, and as a result of that, Margie's mother, Helen, knew how to scrimp and save and cut corners on things, and that's genetic. It ended up with my wife being the same way. She was only happy if I bought something on sale, not the full price. But I had a very fortunate, going back, well, there were no Japanese Americans well, they might have been on the East Coast, but I didn't know any of them. And we called them colored at the time, what they call black now. And the people on the corner, the Mitchells, were both teachers. We never ever had any conflict with them. In fact, I used to walk back and forth with Al Whiting, who was colored or black, And I grew up, I was never, other than that young age up till high school about Italians and Irish, I grew up not to be prejudiced in any way. In fact, eventually, I served in the 10th Cavalry, and there were Caucasian officers and colored enlisted men, which they called at the time. And unfortunately, I'm going a little ahead of myself now, but when we landed in France, as you were, when we landed in Africa, we were told the colored men were not going to be they're going to be support troops. And I actually thought, oh, well, I'm going to back off a little bit on this. I was assigned to the 10th Cavalry after I finished OCS, Fort Riley, Kansas. And they sent us to the 10th Cavalry. The 10th Cavalry had traditions all the way back into, well, Pershing served with them. And I remember meeting a guy on the subway from Jersey City, New York, who was going to go up and apply to West Point for the 10th Cavalry section. And these men were full of pride, and I would have gladly fought with them. Again, a horse cavalry, we had 8 men in a platoon, and I figured, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We didn't have any, we got raw-ass draftees, no basic training at all, and we formed a provisional squadron as a company and exec office and all that sort of thing. And I actually thought, naive as I am, that I would fight with 2 squads and let the third be horse holders, which is a pretty good ratio. But what happened when they sent in these draftees to us and we went through basic training, a number of them didn't want to be Army, and he told them they had to ride horses. Forget it. So it was quite an accomplishment, and even so, they sort of diluted what I call elite, like the Rangers, the paratroopers, the Special Ops, Navy SEALs, selected people, and that's the way I felt about us until we got in these draftees. And it diluted it considerably, and it had nothing to do with color. It had to do with personality. So I feel that those that volunteered made better soldiers than those who were drafted in, kicking and screaming. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's great. And also, I was going to say, don't worry if you start to get ahead of yourself. Say whatever comes to mind, because I can always get us to go back a little bit. Going back a little bit, actually, can you tell me a little bit about your parents? Like, what were their names, and what were their personalities?
My mother had a beautiful name, Cecilia Castley. There's a word for that. What do you call it when it rhymes? It's sort of mellifluous. Why I forget the word, but but what's the word? Melodic. Whatever. But and my mother used to bake bread, and she'd always make a small loaf for me. What my mother and father instilled in me was self-confidence, and it was just my daughter and me. And the funny part is that Marge and I had a 50th wedding anniversary in Yacht Cove, where we lived out in Columbia, South Carolina. And my sister came, and one of her daughters, and my sister was Virginia. I said, hon, I don't ever remember having an argument with you. You know what her answer was? We never did. She idolized me. She was 2 years older, but I was her whatever. And she was a terrific horseman. Anything she did, she accomplished well. And I never knew she was 2 years older than until after she ended up well worth after the war. But and I'm going off the subject now. Get me back to it.
Can you tell me a little bit about your mother? You said,
oh, my mother. I said, yeah. Well, she spoiled the hell. She made me. I told her, went through the loaf of bread, and my mother had class, a beautiful woman, and Euphonious was the name I was trying to think of, Cecilia Castley. And my father. See, I came to an age with the father and mother on a pedestal. There was none of this, you play with the kids. We had a lot. We played football in and baseball. We didn't have little leagues. We went out in the street and played. And my father and mother were like on a piss. But well, I was closer to my mother because she was home all the time. And my father never, like with my own kids, I went swimming with them. I taught them swimming. I taught them horseback riding. Taught them a lot of things, that the sailing, that my father never contributed in. But the most impressive memory I have of my mother and father is how close they were. They did everything together, everything. And I ended up with my wife, Marjorie. We did maybe 80 to 90% together, but she bowled and I didn't. She played a lot of bridge and I didn't. So we sort of separated, but my mother and father were just inseparable. And they were, as I said, it was a different attitude today when you kind of play with your kids. I hope that's the best I can do on that.
So when you were saying
my father was a relatively stern man, but he never hit me, never beat me, never did anything. In fact, the only time he ever interceded, where there was a family that had 6 kids, and I played with one of the youngest, and the second youngest hit me with a rifle, not the gun, the stock on the back. And my father went up and spoke to the parent. The only time he ever interceded. And when I grew up, fist fights were common. Fist fights were common. But we never threw rocks or went beyond that.
So, you know, these fist fights, how would they usually start?
Mostly the big guys egg the little guys on. The Irish were fighters, and I fought a lot as a kid. But the older kids would egg us on. And you'd fight with your friend because he says something to irritate you. And that was where they got their kicks. And it was very common. That was the accepted thing.
Okay. Wow. So you were saying, though, you know, your parents were actually inseparable. What kind of things did they do together?
Shopped. My mother and father were into sports. I'm trying to think now. Back in the, I was born in '16, and I remember when the radio first came out. That's going back. And I remember when telephones were party lines, and you picked up the phone and hoped nobody else was on the line. 1 ring was yours, 2 rings was somebody else's. And basically my father worked. They shopped together, they walked together, they went to movies together. And Jersey City had a unique, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Well, there was a boulevard in Jersey City. And Journal Square ran up to West Side Park. It was possibly 5 or 6 miles. And Sundays, especially Easter, you'd walk the boulevard and you'd meet your friends. And later, as we got older, there was a Fairmont Hotel that served cocktails, and you'd meet your friends and go in there for a drink or two. And my mother and father walked the boulevard, but they didn't participate, like they didn't play golf. I don't know whether they were unique, that they didn't participate. I don't think they had the options.
And when you say you didn't think they had the options, I mean, what kind of options, and why do you think they didn't have these options?
Well, when I grew up, tennis was considered a sissy sport. My golf they didn't play tennis. I played a hell of a lot of things. My mother and father didn't swim. I learned to swim when we were up at a lake, and I wanted to go from one side to the other, and I doggy paddled over. By the same token, my kids could swim almost before they walked. I was very water-oriented. And I sailed, I played golf, I rode horseback, and I played soccer in high school. I was never big enough for football. And my mother and father, as far as I know, never got into any of those activities. There was just not much to do. It was a generation gap, really. But again, they were on a pedestal. Like today, I know there's Al Quillisi lived in our neighborhood, and he said when he was growing up, the parents, were the most significant part of the family. And the kids ate chicken wings. But now that he's grown up as children, the children now get the better part of the chicken, and he's still eating chicken wings. Do I get my point across? In other words, it went from adulation of it was a complete switch from mother and father to children. I don't know if you can follow me on that or not. You can edit that out.
Oh, it's very interesting actually to be able to hear that. Now I know you mentioned your mother's name. What was your father's name?
Martin J. Higgins. I was his junior.
Now, did you have any other siblings?
My sister.
Can you tell me a little bit about your sister?
Well, she was very talented. She sailed. She ice boat sailed. I don't know what you call it, sailing on ice. And they go up to maybe 80, 90 miles an hour. She rode horseback. I'll tell you a funny story about my sister. After I graduated from college in 1939, my sister asked me if I'd like to go horseback riding. And I said, sure. Do you know anything about horses, by the way? Well, anyway, I didn't know this at the time. I rode a horse that was a pacer. Now, pacer means the horse has one foot on the ground all the time, as opposed to a trotting horse, where the right foreleg goes out and the left hind leg goes out together, and vice versa. And they call that posting on the diagonals. Well, I rode in this pacer for a couple of hours, and all I did was sit in the saddle and wiggle my fanny. And the stable master said I was a natural. Well, this is about my sister. Anyway, I worked with the All-American Cable Company, and Art Weber was there, and he was a member of the 101st National Guard. And he said, Marty, would you like to go ride? Do you ride? I said, I'm a natural. So the 101st Cavalry in Brooklyn was about the second biggest indoor riding ring in the world. And he brought me over one Saturday. I met him. And they saddled me up on a horse named Peanuts. I went off 5 times, every part of my anatomy. And I really joined the 101st to learn how to ride. I'll never, although the fascinating part about this, I found this out. Now this is what I call a stretch. You ever hear of thick Irish? Well, you shake your head no. Well, at the 50th wedding anniversary, my sister told me that when I was captured a prisoner of war, my father blamed her because she introduced me to horses, and that's what. Now, that's what I call thick Irish. She told me at the 50th anniversary. So my dad always blamed me for getting you captured, because it was the horses, the cavalry, the infantry, which is a stretch.
Yeah. Wow. Now, how about though when you were kids, you and your sister, what kind of things did you do together? Since I know you said you didn't do a lot of things with your parents.
We didn't. We had different friends. She went to a parochial school. I went to a public. We got along together, but she was 2 years older. I don't think, and she went to a different school. We just got along fabulously, but there was nothing that we really did together.
So when you were about, can you tell me a little bit? I know you were talking about playing in the streets and the kind of, like, tell me, like, in the neighborhood, what were the kids like? And
well, we had blocks, vacant lots, and the streets. There was one block next to us was a dead end street, and we could play stickball in there. And there was a lot behind our apartment. There's a lot on the corner. And you'd play games. Ed Sally, father was a lawyer, and they have a lot of money. And they lived in a house. We lived in an apartment. And he had a basketball court in the backyard. And he had a ping pong table. And we spent a lot of time with Ed Sally. And the father would frequently say, go home and tell your mother we're going away for the weekend. And we'd go off with them. And he had a sister, Natalie. And she was about 2 years younger. And the father would teach us things like public speaking. and he did it in sort of an insidious way. He would have a mock dinner, and we were supposed to get up and speak extemporaneously, which made us very comfortable. And actually, Sally was rather shy, and his sister was almost brazen. Just the opposite. She was like her father, and Eddie was like his mother. So in order to teach Eddie, which I've done this with, this is a diversion, but when I taught my daughter horseback riding, at the age of maybe 10 or 12, I lined up 3 other girls in the neighborhood. And that way I had the commitment at the stables. If it was just my daughter, I'd feel, well, I don't feel like going to, it was a commitment. So I think the father had the same attitude with us. In other words, he made a game of things, so his son was always in the center. At that time, there were Tom Swift books. Ed Sally had you just say to your mother, I'm going up to Sally's and get a book. It's like a library. And the father and mother condoned it. They loved it. And the father, being a very upbeat lawyer, a renowned lawyer, knew a lot of judges, and they all had beautiful young ladies. And they'd invite us to a party. And this is maybe in the teens, early teens. And they'd insist we dance with so-and-so. Well, we didn't want to dance with so-and-so. But as a result, it was quite a social life. And one thing that's significant, at the age of 14, my sister wanted to dance. She wanted me to practice and learn how to dance. And she literally got on the floor and moved my feet. Well, when I went to high school, again, she went to a parochial school. I went to Dickinson High School and a public school. And they had dancing at noontime every day in the cafeteria. And I danced so well I could dance with juniors. I wouldn't try seniors. And I would teach my buddies how to dance. And as a result, Marjorie was a fantastic dancer. And I'm going to get away from myself, but just to pursue this line, she went to this, it was called Normal School, became later New Jersey Teachers College. I went to St. Peter's. And they had what we call mixes. And I saw Marjorie from the rear. She had a beautiful fanny in an evening dress and a wrecked carriage. And when she turned around, she was stunning. Well, I didn't know who she was. So at the next, we had another dance at St. Peter's. I made arrangements to meet her. And she told me her name was Marjorie Jukes. Well, at that time, we had studied in sociology in college that there was a family called the Jukes and Calicaxes that intermarried up in the hills. They were all like nuts. And I thought, oh no, that was J-U-K-E-S. And fortunately, hers was spelled J-E-W-K-E-S. So I remember she told me at the very beginning not to fall in love with her. She's the one I ended up marrying. I fixed her clock.
No, why did she say that?
Oh, she was going with another guy. And I just dated the field. She was dating the field. Again, this is sort of jumping back and forth. But we were both dating. We were never engaged. And this 10th Cavalry I was in, I haven't gone into that yet, but it was such an ideal post. We were in the Cuyamaca Mountains in Campo, Florida, as you were, Campo, California, on the Mexican border. And the married men had these bungalows that the San Diegans used to get away from the heat. And it was an ideal post for married couples. So in 1942, I got my commission, and let me tell you a story you might enjoy. This is tying the whole thing together.
Do you need anything?
I'll finish this one.
Oh, okay.
I spoke at the Historical Society in our local town, the island. It's the 3 cities, Holmes Beach, Braden Beach, and Anna Maria. And I told them this story. I said I joined the cavalry, 1939. We were federalized in January of 141. And we're set up to Fort Devens. And where we had been completely horse, each squadron was left with 1 horse troop, and we became a machine gun troop became a service troop. Well, we're on our way back from maneuvers in the Carolinas. I'm briefing this a little bit. And we're in Hartford, Connecticut. And we had 8 horses and an 18-wheeler. And we always had somebody topside in case of pending accident. We could wake the sleeping men in the box in the cars. Well, I was upstairs, topside, and I heard these hawkers shouting, "Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor." We got back to camp, Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and they rotated us back by groups. And when I went back to Fort Devens, my mother cried, my sister cried, my father cried, we'll never see him again. I came home in 1942, November, after I got my commission, and when I went back, my mother cried, my father cried, my sister, we'll never see him again. I got home in October 1943 to get married, and I heard, what is the bastard going overseas? And that's a true story. Because these girls who said my brother was just inducted just 6 months ago, and he's fighting in Europe, and I'm still riding horses out in California. So I threw you off?
No. I mean, it's great, actually, but I know you had a alarm
No, we can
going
go a
off.
little further.
Oh, okay. So when you heard this news that, you know, the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, what went through your head then?
I kind of knew that the country was going into war after like in the 40s, and I was looking forward to being inducted. I mean, federalized to ride horses every day, and I don't know whether. I think I had an unusual attitude. I think it was one of these great, I'll ride horses every day. And I had no feelings about the Japanese, as opposed to, I didn't really know them. And I knew that Roosevelt was trying to get us to defend Germany. I mean, to invade Germany. And it was sort of a step-by-step process. And all I knew is I was going to end up in combat, which I wanted. We wanted to be tested. And I'll block that from the next thing about going into the war, but go ahead. Mm-hmm. Did I? It was not. See, I was not in Pearl Harbor. And these things were like remote. And the way it affected me, we were going to continue riding horses. That might sound like an isolationist, but whatever it was, I enjoyed riding horses and getting paid for it.
Great. So you were saying that, you know, it didn't really seem like it was a real shock because you kind of saw it kind of come. What kind of things had you heard or that you knew about that made you feel that way, that you knew that war was coming?
Well, I didn't think we'd get involved with the Japanese. Hitler was overrunning Europe. And we were sending stuff, I forget the act they called it. We were sending supplies to them surreptitiously. And Roosevelt was trying to get us into the war, really, and he had no way of doing it legally. And because where I was lucky, really, is fighting in Europe. I understood, and I don't know if this is true or not, that Washington knew the Japanese threat, and they never told the people. This is what I had heard. All I could think of was the Germans overrunning all of Europe, Poland, France, and etc., and almost taking over Britain, England. And I was extremely patriotic, but I never thought anything of the Japanese or the Japanese theater. I just thought of what was going to happen to me.
So anyway, I was going to say, we're going to run back a little bit right now. And can you actually describe for me your childhood home, what it was like going in there, maybe the smells, the sights?
Well, where we lived in Jersey City was what they call a cold water flat. We heated the living room with a kerosene heater. And we cooked, we had a stove in the kitchen that you fired up with coal. And every night my father would have to bank it, so it stayed overnight. And he had a coal bin.
Oh, wait, hold on. I was just asking, actually, if you could describe your childhood home.
Well, we lived in what they call the cold water flat. It was an apartment building of about 6 stories, and we lived on the second. And they had coal stoves in the kitchen. Your mother cooked and heated on, and heated the kitchen. and we had a couple of kerosene heaters in our bedroom. And at that time, the living room was called the parlor, and it had sliding doors that disappeared into the walls. And you only heated that room, and I'm talking about the winter now, when people were coming for dinner. And I remember my mother used to bake a lot of bread, and she'd make, I would turn, I forget what they call this, they'd put the flour and all, it was a big bucket with like an S hook in it, and you'd try to turn that to make the bread. And then she'd put it in the stove, and whenever he was baking there, you weren't supposed to jump and make any noise because the pallet would flatten. She'd always make me a little loaf of bread. And in the winter, we had an ice box for the summer, and you would put a sign in your window whether you wanted a 25-cent or 50-cent block of ice, and they'd carry it up, and they had these like pinches you'd put it in your ice box. And in January and February and possibly March, we had a wooden box outside, and you'd keep that was your refrigerator. And I remember with fond memories, the milk bottles would freeze and the cream would rise to the top, and because you licked off the cream, it was like ice cream. And the interesting thing to me, Steve, I can say this without any equivocation. As a child, you grow up thinking the whole world is like your avenue or your street. And it isn't until you get away. The war did this to more people. We all knew how we grew up and what neighborhoods meant. Neighborhood was your life. And of course, the war came, people got scattered all over the country because of location of camps or whatever. And that really changed the whole concept. People knew, way back then when I was young, would get married and live in the same neighborhood. And mothers would know other little kids. And I remember we had a railroad cut we used to play on. And some woman or family lived on the other side of the railroad. We'd climb up and down these rocks. And the woman across the street would call my mother. And I never could figure out how the hell she knew I was climbing up and down these rocks. And the big event was to get a coal fire going and put, we call them Mickeys, potatoes, and you'd got a coating around them of charcoal. And we'd open them up to steam. The apple inside was, the potato was all steaming. And that was, I can remember those Mickeys cooked over the gas. And we did a lot of outdoor things. And we made up things. Now today, kids are stuck with computers, or we made our own games. We made our own fun. We had baseball team. We didn't have Little League. Nothing was set up instruction. But we were constantly busy with our own games, and we had 2 lots. And depending on what game we're going to play, which lot we do. And again, in the street, we'd play stickball. And the bases might be a rubber tire or a tree. And basically it was imagination to a great degree, rather than, it was reactive rather than passive. Are you following me?
No, definitely. Actually, I was wondering if you could actually describe some of these games that you guys made up and what kind of
one was
games.
Ring-a-Levio. And somebody would hide. I may be mixing my games up. And you'd try to find them. And when you found somebody, you put them in this box with chalk or something like that. And the teams were like equally divided. And when they'd capture somebody, they'd be in the box. And if you got into the box and said Ring-a-Levio, they all fled. And then we played another game. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But one fellow stood up, and the next guy, ride the red horse or something like that, put his head, they were all heads together, and their backs were together, and you leaped as far as you could. And you kept leaping up till they collapsed. And then we played stickball. You know what that is, a little ball and like a broomstick for a handle. And they were all creative. Another thing we did, the bigger guys, like a 10-year-old would get a 4 or 5-year-old on his shoulders. and another guy would do the same thing, and they'd tug each other to see who could pull a guy off. And they were all games that was with imagination, and as I said, nothing structured. And I just had a wonderful childhood. And again, I must say this, I can best describe what I'm saying. It was about my brother-in-law, Ray Hanna, who came from South Carolina, small town. And he said he thought the world was full of scrub pines. For example, on this trip now, here I am living in Florida, flat as all hell, and I'm back in mountains. It's breathtaking, the transfer. Well, until the war came, everybody stayed in their own neighborhood, and the war changed all that. I'm being redundant, but that's what happened.
No, this is great. I mean, actually, can you actually describe a little bit more of your neighborhood then, since this was your world back then?
Well, that's about it. We were down the hill to go to school, and again we're on the hill, and we had gangs, so to speak. They didn't call them gangs at the time, but groups of guys that got together. And even with the groups of guys, we'd get into fights. But I just remember a very pleasant childhood. We didn't know what we didn't have. That's the important thing. You don't know what you don't have until you get it or lose it.
Right.
I think that's as far as I can go on that.
Okay. Oh, great. Now, I know you mentioned that the school was just down the street.
That was down 23 school, grammar school. And they were Irish on the hill going and Italians on the other side.
So besides, your one friend and going to his house, did you have much interaction with the Italians?
No, it was antagonistic rather than interaction. Well, they were our enemy. That was ingrained in us.
So how did you meet this guy?
Well, have you ever read, oh, God. I'm trying to think of a book about Ireland. By Leon Uris, is it? Anyway, it's how generation after generation is taught to hate. Kids don't hate. They're taught by their parents. And that's the conflict we had. I had no use for Italians growing up. My mother and father sort of disdained them. And as I said, high school opened my eyes. And trilogy, well, it was a trilogy. I'm trying to think of the name. But when Leon Uris described what the I wish I could remember that book. It was many, many years ago. How they inculcated their children to be bitter against what the other people did to them, the Protestants and the Catholics, and they were brainwashed like they do today. In some cases, they hate each other before they know them. And as I said, I got my big awakening in high school.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about that awakening in the sense of how did you end up going to this guy's house?
Well, we were both in the glee club. We both played soccer. And his parents owned a bakery. And we'd get down and they'd bring out these big loaves of bread. We visited back and forth with each other. I don't know how we became friends, but it was that was an awakening, that these people aren't the idiots that everybody says they are. I don't think I can go further than that. Okay. But when in high school, the Italians and the Irish intermeshed. That explains it best, I think. And it was not, I forget how I put it earlier, it was not what you are, but who you are. We all my life, well, let me, this is way off the subject. For my 87th birthday, my daughter had over 35 or 40 people come. I had all the people in my neighborhood. I've got a couple that cleans my house every 2 weeks. I've got a waitress I eat in every week. I invited the cleaning people to come, my waitress to come. And with the cleaning people, I said, look, you're not coming as cleaning people, you're coming as my friends. I had professors, I had lawyers. I have a very eclectic group of friends, and I've never judged anybody by what they are. Maybe what and who may make it. But I'm people-oriented. And when people extend themselves to me, I extend myself to them. I like everybody, but if someone doesn't respond, I don't need them. But I've got an eclectic group of friends through good fortune. In fact, I don't know if this question will come up eventually, but knowing nothing about the Japanese Americans, I have found out everybody I've met has been absolutely fantastic, and this is not blowing anything. Well, I happen to meet a group of them that were highly educated, compassionate. Maybe they all are, I don't know. But the ones I met in the 522 and the 442nd, I think it's almost incomprehensible to say what a wonderful group of people they are. And I say that very sincerely. I don't think I ever saw a fat Japanese American. No, Americans come out like this, you know, everything hanging out. But I don't know where the hell I'm going on this thing, so I'll let you pick it up again.
Don't worry about it. But I guess part of what I was curious about is, since you had said, like, your parents were telling you how you shouldn't really interact, and I guess you should, basically hate Italians.
No, my parents never said that.
Oh, really?
It was implied.
Hmm.
They didn't. I don't think my mother and father ever directed me away from them. But this was sort of a neighborhood attitude with kids, the Italian were Irish. I don't remember my mother and father steering me in that direction, except I know I once dated a girl out of the city, and my mother and father, aren't there enough girls in Jersey City? You have to go out to Glen Lodge or something like that. And my mother and father I was brought up a Catholic, and back then, and this has nothing to do with the subject, but that meant being an Irish Catholic, the priests always sided with the man. He could be a wife beater, he could be a drunkard, and all the priests said to him, said to the wife, if she confessed, God will straighten it out. And most Irish, they had large families, and the mother didn't want them, but the church sided with the men for decades, and the men could do no wrong. And I remember at that time, divorce is almost unheard of. It was a stigma. But a hell of a lot of people would have been better off if they got a divorce. And that's way off the subject, but I just thought I'd throw that in. You can do whatever you want with it.
Right. Now, I guess since you were saying that there was always this sentiment around, and you said there was always this kind of sentiment of this antagonism between Italians and Irish. I guess part of my curiosity is, you said how it kind of changed in high school. Mm-hmm. Can you think of any reasons why it changed that way?
Well, we met them, as I said, with Mike. I met in classes, glee club, soccer, and we didn't go up there. We were not, well, I mentioned Leon Uris, we were not prejudiced by my mother and father. This was the book. And I was always open about as friends are concerned. We just never cohabitated isn't the word. That means living with. But we just never made any Italian friends in grammar school. It was unthinkable. And it was not from my mother and father, it was just the attitude that we got, well, that kind of, what would I say, when you get something by neighborhood attitude rather than, my mother and father didn't really knock them at all, except it was just the opposite. Like, I said, if I dated an Italian girl, my mother would, well, why I'm not dating an Irish girl, if you follow what I'm saying. They were prejudiced, but they didn't put it on us. When I was talking about Leon Uris, it was in Ireland that this went on. Okay. My mother and father never discussed Ireland. They're both born in Jersey City. They never, ever discussed Ireland. Never. It was like they hid it. And I'm going off on
No, that's great, because actually that explained a lot more to me. So I guess then how did, since you were saying it was more of kind of a community feeling of animosity toward the time, how did they feel about your friendship with your friend Mike then?
There was never a question. I didn't know that.
Okay.
He'd visit me, I'd visit him. They accepted that. No, they never. I would think, as I said, if it was an Italian girl I dated, or a Protestant girl I dated, I was Irish Catholic. My mother never told me what to do, but she did it by implication. Why, you know, there were some nice Irish girls here, or that sort of thing. And at the time, when an Italian guy married an Irish girl or vice versa, it was sort of, wow. And eventually, quite a few intermarried. The same thing with the Jewish and the Irish. And in most cases, they became great marriages. You know, it was a matter of, well, as I say, it was a matter of an awakening, I would call it, to judge people as they are, not who they are. You know, whether you're Japanese or whether you're colored or whether you're black or whether you're Chinese or whatever. This is a distinct diversion. But in 1982, I got my master's degree from the University of South Carolina. And it was adult education. And I taught law bark literacy. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's teaching how to people read and write for a couple of years. And then it took so long, I was looking for something I could still volunteer with and keep active. Well, there was a little squib in the paper that they were looking for VISTA volunteers. And again, I was about 66 or 68, I think it was. And I called up and said, look, I'm 66 or 68. Am I too old to be a VISTA volunteer? And Yu Fang Chang was the chaplain in charge of volunteers, and he said, if President Reagan can run the country at 76, you can be a VISTA volunteer. Well, he's Malaysian. And my assignment was to go out and speak to schools, luncheons, groups, dinner groups, and try to get people to come in and tutor the kids in high school. They had high school at Birch. And when I'd get somebody in, I'd have them report to me on the way in. I'd take them to the classroom and say, I want you to come back to me and tell me how it went. Well, I loved what I was doing, and I was successful in getting tutors to come in. In fact, what I did when I first joined them, am I going too far afield? When I first joined the VISTA volunteers, I tutored these kids to know what I was asking these people to do. And I learned a lot. Some kids were in there and they wanted to get home. Some kids were in there and the parents didn't want them to go home. And I had a lot of empathy for them. Well, the only reason I started this story is Yu Fang Chang was Malaysian. He and I had lunch together every Wednesday for 15 years until I moved down here. And he pleaded with my daughter, let me stay up there. He'd take care of me, and he would. He calls me once a week. So it's the person, not the race that counts. And I'm way off field maybe, but whatever.
That's great, because, I mean, I don't think it's that far off the field, because you were talking about how it was an awakening to that fact, and you just gave us a great example, so, no, definitely.
Okay.
Now, talking about school, were there any subjects that, you know, you really enjoyed in school?
Well, I'll tell you a little incident that I enjoyed high school. In my senior year, the last year, about 2 months before graduation, I was advised by the office that I hadn't missed a day of school while I was in high school. And I thought this is going to be embarrassing to be called up on the stage and say, Marty has never, so I cut classes. I didn't want to be a goody two-shoes. But I just enjoyed high school. Actually, in college, I took 18 credits of pedagogy, which is for teaching. And I love to teach. And the only thing I needed, I'm jumping ahead of you, but the only thing I needed for practice teaching in New Jersey was 3 months of practice teaching I could have taught. And when I came back from World War II, that was one of my options. And the teachers were starving to death like they're underpaid right now. And in fact, a friend of mine was the principal of a high school, and he left to go into sales. And I got into sales. I was making twice as much money as a teacher right off. So I could have gotten a doctorate in teaching from Columbia University like that, and because I know I had the skills. And you know, when courses come easy to you, you know you're adaptable to them. And I got 90s, 95s in all my courses. In fact, I thought it was a snap. This is back in 1939 when I graduated. So I have an affinity to teach. I love to teach. Now, I've taught horseback riding, I've taught sailing. I taught a lot in the Army, basic training. And my satisfaction is to see the person, male or female, develop. Now, some people will take like handicapped kids. In fact, in Laubach literacy, I had one man, and they had lesson plans. And the kid was like 18 or 19. He couldn't remember one lesson to the next. And I couldn't handle that. I saw no development. I thought we're just spinning our wheels. And I didn't know how to get rid of him. I didn't want to tell his father. His father loved me. But I saw I got no feeling of goodness out of it. And thank God they moved to Charleston. I didn't have to tell the father. But my, what should I say, fulfillment comes from seeing somebody that doesn't know which side of the horse to get up on, and see them riding and end up in a canter and all that sort of thing, or seeing them develop. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy teaching.
So then when you were in high school, was that what you kind of aspired to do?
No, I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. Because it said Sally, I told you, he was a very famous criminal lawyer. And his son was not, his daughter would have made a good one. And I so admired this father, Ed Sally. And I thought at the time, boy, I'd like to be a criminal lawyer, get somebody who saw somebody hang somebody and get them off the hook. It was the challenge, the oration, the presence of the jury that intrigued me. It was not the prosecuting. It was the challenge. And in fact, when I came out of the Army, there was a small school in Jersey City called John Marshall. And I started in on that program, whatever it is you get from the Army. And they assured us we'd all graduate, but they wish we studied. And I went to a lawyer friend of my father-in-law for advice, and he said, unless you have connections, you won't make it in anything. I had enough money coming in from the Army, and said I was going to be a law clerk for like a year, or a year and a half, and really get involved in it. And he talked me out of it. And the only reason I don't regret becoming a lawyer, I would have stayed in Jersey City, probably made a judge or something like that, assuming I didn't screw up. And the only reason I don't regret it is by joining the Russell Playing Card, which is a division of two other companies, or the U.S. I went out to Chicago, and my son and daughter were both adopted from St. Vincent's Hospital, and they were both picked out for us before they were born. Missy was about 3 weeks old, and my son had a problem with his rectum, and he was in there about 6 weeks. And finally, the diarrhea stopped. We brought him home, and it was like a film over his rectum, whatever it was. I wouldn't have had both kids. Someone else would have adopted them, but they wouldn't have been mine. So I don't regret a damn thing about not becoming a lawyer. I would have loved to have been a trial lawyer. I didn't have the brains to be a corporate lawyer. I like the acting bit. Try to mold. In fact, most of my life I've been very active in organizations where I lived. I was sort of in the background, but I would get people to run for office and this and that. I was a conciliator. And I think that's one of my strengths, bringing people together. I do it naturally.
Great. Now, jumping just a little bit back,
Oh,
actually, you had just mentioned how, you were going to have to go on stage for, having never missed a day of, high school, and then you started cutting classes. Did they still
I just cut one day.
And so did they still pull you up on that
Nope.
stage?
I just cut one day. I didn't want to be a goody two-shoes, as I said earlier. It never occurred to me to cut. Never occurred to me till I heard that from the office. But I'll tell you a funny story about that in high school. As a Boy Scout, I was a bugler and I played the drums. And there were a group of 5 of us. We used to walk about, I don't know, it was 5 or 10 miles up to the school where they had it. And high school I was 14. And I got called out of study class. And the principal said, oh, Bert Quirk was a bugler. Bert rang my door, hit the door. Said, the principal wants to see him. I went up. And the principal said, do you play the bugle? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, we're having a program in the auditorium as patriotic. And as a flag enters, would you mind playing To the Colors? I said, no. So the day we were there, Bert and I were on the stage. And I figured he's a better bugler than I am. He figured he's a better bugler. I'm a better bugler than him. I stopped to follow his lead, and he stopped. We were each other until the flag got up on the stage, and then we hit it. And the principal had to tell us to stop. When I back into the study class, they raised the hell out of me. But I just think of that as a memorable moment.
So Marty, I know you've already told us about where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor. Can you tell us a little bit about, shipping overseas?
Well, I'll bounce back to the 10th Cavalry. I told you earlier it was an elite group when I joined it. And I told you about the basic training fellows didn't want to be in. And I might have mentioned this as a platoon of 36 men. I figured one would be horse, which I think is a pretty good ratio. In other words, I could count on 24, I guess, in combat, and the others horse holders. So I literally thought we were going to fight with these colored men. And one thing that kind of, I don't know how to put it, but the Japanese Americans had a chance to prove themselves, and the colored didn't. Now, they called them colored at the time, and I think they would have made damn fine soldiers. And we had an option of avoiding the war and staying with them as support troops, or getting into combat. And we switched over to the Infantry Replacement Center. And they trained us for about a month on infantry tactics. And well, I was lucky. I was sent. We were over in Africa. We landed in Casablanca, and I remember writing my wife. I can't tell you where I am, but what was that song, Casablanca? I'll see you. Anyway, there was Casablanca. Was out with Humphrey Bogart. Oh, as time goes by, and I'll see you as time goes by. So she knew I was in Casablanca. And then they put us on a train, and there we picked up some colored troops that were really difficult. I think they were the same kind of people. Maybe I'm going to go off that subject. It doesn't do them any good. But I honestly thought we were going to combat with them. And we all wanted to be tested. So we volunteered, and after 2 weeks of fighting, I was ready to go home. But it didn't work out that way. But so I'm jumping around here. So get me back on point.
Okay. Well, so now can you tell me, just at least for people who don't know, which unit were you attached to when you volunteered for the infantry?
Well, I was lucky. I was in June and July. They sent me to the 36th Division. We just volunteered, and I was sent to the 36th Division, the 141st Regiment, and the 1st Battalion. Well, when I reported into Colonel Balloff, he said to me, "Lieutenant, you have a right to wear your cross sabers. You earned them. But I think the men would respect you more if you embraced the infantry." Well, I wasn't going to take off my cross sabers. The way he put it, I did. And we had an episode. The exec officer, Lieutenant Daughtry, had us out on a field trip. I think I might have mentioned this in my letter to you. And we're about 10 miles from camp. And he dismissed us. And I told my men to stay together. And I flagged the 2.5-ton truck down. We all got in it. The men had already showered and changed clothes, and the others were drifting in all afternoon. And that was what I call the beginning of a spree. And I know when I took over the company, my men would follow me, my platoon. That's another story, but I'll back off till you ask me another question.
Well, I guess...
Well, let me tell you this. This to me is significant. We had a practice run, and I went charging off the LST or whatever the hell it was, and went off a shell hole, and went ass over tea kettle. So I figured I'll go off the real approach. I'll go off slowly. Well, we had two hills. Joe Sanchez and I had one, and I had one. I think Charlie Company was held in reserve. And I have two scouts out. We're charging up the hill, and the Germans up with machine guns. Well, I hit the ground. Well, the scouts hit the ground first. And I literally thought, okay, Higgins, what the hell are you going to do? I looked over and saw Joe Sanchez, who had had a battlefield promotion, and he's charging up the hill. I figured if that bastard can do it, I can. I jumped up firing. Everybody jumped up firing, and the goddamn Germans surrendered. I thought, this is a piece of cake. Well, then about the second or third day, snipers, we were lead element, and snipers had knocked off about 6 or 7 of my men. And I went after them with another guy. I can't remember who had with me. And at one point, I gave them so long to target me, and I dove for a tree. And as I did, I felt I got a whack in the family. I thought I was hit in the family. And then they surrendered, and I was ready to kill them. This is in the book, by the way. And I figured they've killed so many of my men, and now they're quitting? No way. And I literally had my 45 out, and my platoon sergeant, Jenkins, stopped me, which I would have regretted later. So that was when, I was going to say, when the Germans surrendered, I thought it was a piece of cake. And then we started taking care. We had lost 17 or 18 men in the company the first 2 days. And I've got a copy of the losses we had at the time. And then we had a damn good man, Captain Jim O'Neill. And the executive officer I was not impressed with. And O'Neill was killed after about the 3rd week of fighting, or the 4th week. And Daughtry took over, and he was killed after about another week. And this Lieutenant LaValle was put in charge of the company. He had been a weapons platoon. So whenever I show, you know what a sound power phone is? Well, we run wires, and you connect to a sound power phone. It's a wire rather than radio transmission. And if I ever show a wire, German or American, I'd tie into it, and so either I'd listen to it or my runner would. And LaValle was supposed to attack this village of Saint Aimé from early in the morning, and he vacillated all day. And I would hear the regimental commander, Steele, giving him directions. Actually, at first he was on his own. Then he started to be more specific by the afternoon. And LaValle stalled and stalled and stalled. So Steele said he was coming up. So I went up with where LaValle was. And LaValle looked at him and said, I can't handle the company. He looked at me, would you set to take it? I said, yes, I will. And we went through the woods at night. I knew my platoon would follow me, but I didn't know whether anybody else would. And the whole company followed me. And at the first light and dawn, we had one half of the street in Saint Aimé, and we were running out. The Germans had the other side. And this sounds vague, but I can remember putting a light machine gun on a mahogany desk and firing. Well, I wasn't firing it. And I'll never forget a beautiful mahogany desk with firing from the window. Well, anyway, we had one half of the town. The Germans we were running out of ammunition. And as Harry Ubeth that you interviewed, he was a platoon leader. He broke through with a tank with extra ammunition. And with that, we took over the whole town. In fact, there was one situation where this Eddie Guy, you may have read or heard about him, he was the weapons platoon leader. He was firing his mortars, his 60-millimeter mortars, up over our house onto the back of the house, the other house. And I went up and I thought, can't you adjust them to get the front of the house? The damn things were straight up in the air. So anyway, the first attack I had as company commander was a success. So then I did all right. I did all right with them.
Great. Now that first incident you talked about, where you charged forward and Joe Sanchez moved, you're like, if he can do it, I can do it. That was Blue Beach.
Yeah, whatever beach, red, blue.
Oh, okay.
In fact, our battalion was considered. They thought we were going to get wiped out on the landing. We had a diversionary force, and that's when we got the Presidential Unit Citation for the landing. It was near St. Raphael and Frejus.
Oh, okay. And so now that you told us about Saint-Ami, where you took command of, can you actually tell me then what happened after Saint-Ami? Now that you're in command,
I draw a blank there, Steve, from that up into the Lost Battalion. I have the source that we all attacked. We went through Herpelmont, and a lot of it is a blank. Let's see, there was one place where we were. I'm trying to think of.
Well, I won't worry about it. Then what we can do is, why don't we skip ahead then to the events leading up to the Lost Battalion.
Okay.
Can you tell me a little bit about
I told the colonel, we had been cut off several times, and we always worked our way out of it. And we were going up the ridge, and we were being attacked on both sides. And I said to the colonel, we're going to get cut off. And he said, go ahead, troops will be behind you. And they were never behind us. And when we stopped, and then we're being attacked from the front and both sides. And theoretically, somebody was supposed to be coming behind us, and they never did. And the rest of it is in the speech. It was the first couple of days we didn't realize how significant it was. And then they had a minefield behind us, and we sent out a patrol of about 50 men. I think 5 men came back. I don't know what happened to the others. And we didn't realize how bad it was until about the third day, and this is in my speech if you've read it. And we never knew what was happening, other than the fact that someone was coming. We never knew it was the Japanese Americans. And all I can tell you is we were more concerned about a defensive position, and as I said in my speech, we should have been bypassed. There was no way it was worth losing so many men. I think Dahlquist did it. As a matter, I don't think he did it to take advantage of the Japanese Americans in 442. I think it was the stigma of losing a battalion. And we weren't a complete battalion at the time. But he was a good man. I liked Dahlquist. He was right up front. But I could see where Senator Inouye felt that he sacrificed them to save Texans. And as I started to say earlier, pretty much ratio. I was from New Jersey. I'm talking about the officers now. Harry Ubeth from New York. Joe Kimball from Pennsylvania. Blonda, artilleryman from Ohio. And Gene Nelson from Massachusetts. And as I say, I don't remember any Texan left by then. And one thing I don't think they've ever considered is that we were almost desperate. We have been fighting from August 15th in the line. And I don't think anyone ever considered the losses we had up to that point and how decimated we were. And I forgot we got replacements September 21st, but we did. And we suffered tremendous casualties going through that, tremendous casualties. And I remember, I haven't said this to anybody else, but it was a Catholic Mass, and I think it might have been in early September. As I said at the beginning, I thought war was a snap. And it was so horrible, I prayed to God to kill me and have the war end. I was that bad. And I just assumed I'd be killed and my wife would remarry. She didn't like that when I told her that. But the only way I could have fought, because the kids had families, children. It hurt me so when anything happened to them. And even like this Iraq, I won't go down that avenue, but I see these reservists and National Guard called up, leaving families, I mean, with children. I think it's abominable. And I just can't see married men in combat at all. No, not married men, family men. Family men is a big difference. And then, of course, I'm jumping way ahead now. During Korea, I had an option of getting a permanent captaincy or out. Well, I would have gotten credit from 39 at about just 4 more years, or 5, to get a retirement benefits at age 62 if I stayed in. On the other hand, I might have gotten my ass shot off in Korea. Well, I had Michael and Missy, so I got out. I could not have fought to live. Do you follow what I'm saying? Yeah. And other than the book, but that article saying I was afraid, I was never scared in combat, never. I just went on the assumption I'd be killed. And that was the only way I could fight. But with 2 kids, no way. Am I making sense? That was my personal attitude. But I literally prayed to God as He killed me. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. There's no glory in war at all. And fortunately, the human mind is so constructed. You remember the highlights, and you kind of forget the miserable part. And the worst part for me was being a POW, not only being captured, but what I went through. Now, the Japanese Americans, the lost battalion was the most significant thing for them. To me, it was being captured. I thought it was a stigma, a stain, and I assumed and some of the men were relieved the war was over, and I was just the opposite. I was extremely patriotic, and I had been hit in the knee, and the Germans wanted to send me to a hospital. Oh, incidentally, we had about 17 German POWs, and the first thing, well, I got hit in the knee. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but we'll cover this while I think of it. And I went down to try to knock a tank off. I had I had a carbine with a rocket, a grenade launcher and I tried to knock a tank out, and he saw me first and fired. And I thought I lost my left leg, but it evidently just grazed it. But I got a concussion from the shell. And the men, it was one of these houses that was built on the side of a hill. And the men carried me back upstairs. And when I came to, I looked out, and it was just Germans running around. And I was with 8 men, and I thought they had, I thought they had gotten everybody else out. But the thing that peed them off is how many men they lost against us. They thought we were a regiment, and we were just a company, or a battalion. And our casualties were such, there weren't that many. And we had killed beaucoup Germans. And this is going almost too far, but the Germans wanted to send me to a hospital. I said, no, I wanted to stay with my men. I didn't realize that they had an officers' camp, a non-coms camp, and a enlisted men's camp. I thought I'd be with my guys. And so at one point, I know I'm getting way off on this, the SS troops came in a truck, and took the 4 officers, Crown, Hancock, and Loomis and me, to a Bavarian hotel. And they wined and dined us. Next thing you know, Crown was called in, and when he came back, he whispered to me, Heinrich Himmler. Do you know who he was? Heinrich Himmler, he was the hatchet man for Hitler. And the German medical did the interrogation, and Heinrich Himmler pretended he didn't know any English, but I know damn well he did. And he never asked me about tactical situations. You want to know how I felt about Roosevelt? I didn't particularly care about him, but I think he's a great man. And anyway, there was nothing that he asked me that breach security. On the way out, the general said to me, oh, he was screaming at me. He was so mad. And he said, you are lucky you will go home alive. And I looked Heinrich Himmler in the eye and said, I would not have mind dying for my country. On the way back to the room, I think, you don't say things like this to this killer henchman. And then the next thing that happened, the SS put us in the back of a truck, a small truck, to bring us back to where the compound was. And they had rations in the back. And I said to the other 3, I said, look, there's some cheese back here with the paraffin wrapper. Should I take it? And they all agreed. Well, about 20 minutes after they left, they came back screaming like hell. And I reached in my pocket and gave them the cheese. And they hit me. Not that bad. And then they kept screaming. And we didn't know why they were screaming. And this Jack Crown, who I found out later was a lousy officer, he was taking it for himself and didn't say anything, didn't ask the others. And they told us it was an act against the Third Reich and we would be shot. And I lived with that premonition, and I finally said to Jack, you know, there were four of us. I said, we have to take the rap because somebody has to go home and tell our wives what happened. So we had that hanging over our head all the while we were POWs. And then it took us, we were captured December 10th. We went through the German subway system. We ended up in Poland Christmas Eve, in Schumann, the officers' camp. And they always suspected POWs as being German in disguise. And they had to identify us. So, and there's one part I forgot to tell you. After my commission in November, when I came home in '42, I mentioned the Boulevard before. Well, I met this Frank Maxwell, and he had just been gotten commissioned in the infantry. And we had a drink together, and he went back for his orders, and I went back for mine. And it turned out he was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division in Africa, and he was captured in his first attack. He was a POW for almost 2 years. And he identified me, and so and I could identify my other officers because we were acceptable. And he was repatriated on ulcers about 2 weeks after I arrived in camp. And he gave me his extra socks and his extra long drawers, which came in very, very handy. And the most significant part, he was able to go home and tell my wife I was alive. All they had was an MIA. And then the march, after the marches, and this is written up, I didn't bring a copy of this, when the Russians crossed the Vistula, the Germans marched us towards Luckenwald in Germany. And after about 3 weeks, I collapsed. We stole some raw potatoes from a farm. If the bomb would hold 100, they put 200 in. And at one point, after we ate these potatoes, I had to go. I had diarrhea, and by the time I crawled out over the guys, I had soiled my long drawers, and I hung them on a tree and changed drawers. And the next morning they were stolen. Someone stole them with them. Would you imagine how bad they were? Well, I collapsed after that time. And as you collapsed and got ill, they put you in boxcars. We ended up in Luckenwald. And they weren't marked with the Red Cross. We were strafed by our own people. And we couldn't get out until they let us get out. And at one point we're outside and the guys are trying to wave them off, but these fighter planes were coming in strafing. Fortunately, I don't think they hit anybody. And then we ended up in this Luckenwald, and the rest of us in that POW book about what Franz Steiner wrote. I won't run through that. Now look, get you back on your questions.
No, this is great. I mean, quite honestly, you make it very easy on me because you actually, when you do jump ahead, you usually cover questions that I was going to ask anyway. One thing I wanted to jump back to a little bit, because I know it wasn't quite as significant for you, but it's something that I think a lot of people need to have a better understanding about is in the Lost Battalion, like what exactly was happening then, and maybe telling us a little bit about the officers and how you guys determined to build your defense and the situation you were in.
Well, I saw a thing on a website how Blonder ran the operation, and he was your forward observer, and he never left his foxhole. Harry and I ran the whole show. And the most significant thing was setting up a perimeter defense around all sides. And by then, we were running very low on, in fact, I think you saw I sent you a copy of that picture in the Times. They were shooting in shells with halazone tablets and in some cases, first aid equipment. And we were getting casualties from trench feet. And now there's one mistake we made as officers. We got what they call snowpacks issued, it must have been in maybe September, early October. and they were rubber soles and leather uppers. And they came with 2 sets of inner soles, felt inner soles. And the thing was, now the orders were out. At night, you changed the inner soles that you wore in your chest, under your shirt, and put on the dry ones on your feet. Well, some of the men did not follow that, and we had a lot of trench feet cases. In fact, Jimmy Yamashita mentions that too, about casualties. It's still a casualty. It's as bad as a man being wounded or shot or killed, because they're all counted as casualties. And between fighting and wounded and all that, we were in a situation where we were just about lucky enough to hold off. We were not in a situation where we could counterattack, let me put it that way. And I can't say more than more. Well, again, in that speech that I gave some day-to-day operations, but we never ever thought. Well, again, getting back to the speech, in hindsight, I think we should have been bypassed and left somebody mop up. But I think it was Dahlquist. Well, again, I don't want to repeat myself so much. But what really hurt was when the Japanese Marines got absolutely no recognition. And I'll get a copy of that Stars and Stripes and send it to you, Robert.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, you know, in terms of the Stars and Stripes, and you were saying how...
We did I can't emphasize this enough. We didn't know until 1995 the casualties you people had. 1995, there was nothing. Oh, no. Mike Masaoka came out to Chicago, and I mentioned this earlier, and he was the Washington lobbyist for the Japanese Americans, the civil, I forget the title, Defamation League, whatever it was. And Tats Kishida was in Chicago. And they took us out for dinner, Japanese dinner. And at the time, I found out later, Mike Masaoka's brother was killed in a lost battalion to the rescue. But they never told us how many men you guys lost. I say you guys because you represent them. We never knew until 1995. Never.
So what was it like to hear that all these years later?
It was shocking. It was shocking. And if you read my speech, I think I expressed myself pretty succinctly there. We never knew until night. That's a long, long time not to get recognition.
So during the operation, because you say that you personally felt that, you know, you should be bypassed, and that, you know...
No, this is in retrospect.
Oh, in retrospect, okay.
We never knew the condition. All we knew, I'll put it this way, and this is what the Japanese Americans, I don't think, quite consider. We had been in line since August 15th. I know you guys, the first thing we did was Brières, and you took a beating there. We had been taking a beating all the way up through France. As I said, I think when I joined the outfit, half of my platoon might have been Texans. By the time I lost battalion, I don't think one was left. I can't think of any. All replacements. And we were decimated. Well, a battalion is a lot bigger than 270 men. And I know they suffered tremendous losses, but we did too. And I know my company turned over 200% while I was in it, to December 10th. I've read figures like the division turned over 400%. Now, I don't mean, a lot of men fought a long, long war in real echelon. The cooks, the waiters, the headquarters troop, the communications people. I'm talking about combat men. Combat men. And there's a hell of a big difference. And you're a guy, someone asked a long time in war, ask him what his position was. Now, granted, and again, this is not a good comparison, but Iraq, that maintenance division took a wrong turn. And this girl Lynch is getting a medal, decorations, and all that sort of thing. They were not a combat unit. Someone basically screwed up. And I haven't heard anything about the commanding officer of that unit, whether it's a platoon leader or a company commander. Nothing. I don't want to get a director.
Okay. But I was going to say, could you tell us a little bit about, the history of the 104th in terms of the designation, like the Alamo Regiment?
Let me put it this way. I'm basically horse cavalry. I knew nothing about I knew less about the infantry. You ever hear of Peter Oosterman? I told you he's a reenactment group in Holland. When I visited him in September of '98, he had a closet full of clothes. He had a dummy dressed as GI with an M1 over his back, full-size dummy. And he was asking me questions about, I don't know a damn thing about the infantry. I was cavalry. And I knew nothing about the Alamo. I know later I found out they're called the Alamo Regiment. But you can't quite consider, I didn't even know how many men were squad. When I took over the company, and I can verify this, there were 24 men riding with our rear supply. And I have this letter giving you who made the landing. And it was 24, 26 BCs. When I took over the company, I found out that these were BCs from Italy, battle casualties. Well, you ever assigned missions predicated on the strength of your troop? And you take 24 away from a couple of hundred, well, it was 107, you're losing a lot of men, plus our casualties. Well, I spoke to our battalion doc and said, what about these guys? I said, I don't want to give them Section 8s, which means you're nuts, and get rid of them. I don't want to impinge. They may have been heroes in Italy. So he said, Dr. Shannon a while. So he said, send them back to me. I sent them back. Next day they were returned to us. Shannon said, send them back again. I sent them back again, never saw them. So you fought with what you had, not what it should be. I used more cavalry tactics than I did infantry. For example, the weapons platoon was always in the rear. They carried 30 air-cooled machine guns and 60mm mortars. And I changed that technique. So I had a lead platoon. The machine guns were behind the lead platoon. And I had a feeling in combat, a theory in combat, when you're fired upon, you get beaucoup lead in the air. You may not see a target of opportunity, but you get stuff in the air, they'll figure you have you zeroed in. And when my first platoon, well, the lead platoon, I should say, was fired on, those 30s went into action a hell of a hurry, and it really, really helped. It's not an infantry tactic, as far as I know. But the men in the lead platoon got the support. As I said, and I'm not an infantry trained officer, and I knew nothing about the Alamo or what they were. I just went in as a replacement officer. So I can't give you any of the Texas stuff that you might need, but you can get it other places.
Definitely. Actually, yeah, that's great, because I love, being able to hear about your own background and how you ran. So in terms of, during the Lost, battalion operation, I know you were running things in, a manner where, you and the other officers got together and you were put in charge. Mm-hmm. Can you actually summarize a little bit of what happened there, and also a little bit about how they tried to resupply you?
What I can't rationalize is I was a second lieutenant when I made the landing, because promotions in cavalry were almost never. And I made first lieutenant after 2 or 3 weeks. I forget why. I was probably the lowest ranking. I think all the others were first lieutenant, the lowest ranking officer there. It used to be what's your date of rank. And why they designated me, I was asking Harry how I was designated. It was not drawing straws or anything like that. Somehow they just told me to be the commander. Maybe because I was crazy. No, but I still can't figure out how I made it. But I didn't mind it because I was a gung-ho soldier, not stupid. I didn't risk any lives. But I was a gung-ho patriot, and I had a lot of gung-ho men. And one of the most difficult parts about the American Army, you can see this any place, is we try to protect our soldiers. And for example, this has nothing to do with your question, but say we're attacking a village in southern France, and we start to take heavy casualties. We pull the men back, level the town with artillery, and then come in and say, you're liberated. Now, the Germans use that area for R&R, rest and recuperation. I don't think they ever fired a shot. And then, I'm going off the field completely, then the people expect to get back to their regular life after they've obliterated the town. Then the rear echelon comes up, the communications people, the supply people. I went back at one point, one of my non-coms really loved a young girl who was my CP at one point. And he wanted to say hello to this lady when I went in. And the communications out was there, ordering them around like slaves, the mother and the daughter. And I blasted the hell out of them. They were not combat people. And they were treating them like, and this, people can't understand. I love the French people. I think they're very brave, and this you know nothing about. But the French, this reminds me of the Star Wars program that Bush is pushing, you know, with the satellites and stuff. Did you ever hear the Maginot Line? Well, the French were convinced that they were impenetrable. The Germans could not get through it. They flew over it. So the French people were sold a bill of goods, and I think it's the same thing with this Star Wars project they're talking about. It'll never work. But Eisenhower warned us, I'm going too far afield, I know this. Eisenhower warned us about the industrial complex, and that's what it's in, defense industrial complex. And they're still discussing it. And I better not go any further on that direction. Am I answering some of your questions?
Oh, no, I mean, definitely. I guess part of it is, you know, so during you know, the Lost Battalion incident, I know that you guys were, you know, you're cut off, and you know, you're put in charge. Now, what were some of the things that you guys, you know, were some of the top priorities? Because I know you guys had to build a perimeter.
Well,
and
again, this is in the speech. We asked the men to turn in whatever they had so we could split it with everybody. And I had 2 sections of heavy machine guns, water-cooled 30s, and we had to set them in a good defense. In fact, two of the guys were out in Hawaii with me, Bruce Estes and Jack Wilson. And the main control, what we did is we pulled everything white we could find and made like a cross, I think it was a cross or an arrow, to where they should drop their shells. They had these fighter planes coming in with dropping bombs, loaded with ammunition and halazone tablets for water and first aid kits. And we were shelling our own position. Unfortunately, one of the tanks hit a soldier and killed him. But we buried, I think it was 4 or 5 there, and I had asked permission how to do it. And on a day-to-day basis, again, a lot of it is a blank. All we knew is the Germans had us surrounded, and we held off. And as I said, it was the 3rd or 4th time we were surrounded, but we always got out of it somehow. And this time our luck ran out. Well, the interesting thing, which no one knows, is my wife thought after the Lost Battalion, I was sent to R&R. 2 days later, we're back in the line. I'll tell you a story that I haven't told anybody. After the Lost Battalion, I got 4 officers. I was fighting my own. I was the only officer in my company. I wanted to make Eddie Guy a platoon leader, but he didn't want it. Well, we're running wire, and either the regiment or the battalion said, 1 officer can go to Paris, 5 of us, 2 or 3 days, and 1 non-com. Well, I'm not about to say one of these bastards just came up. So I took my first sergeant, and he took extra first sergeant shirts with stripes. I took extra first lieutenant bars, so we could be non-coms or officers. He was a good man, Bandora. We went in and got drunker than skunks. And what I didn't tell you is right after the Lost Battalion, Mary Hemingway came up, Ernest Hemingway's wife. And this is after a lot of the hullabaloo was over. I remember asking if she'd like to go out in the front line. She said yes. I was going to send her out to the furthest foxhole near the enemy with Sergeant Crippish, who was a hell of a good man. And she said, yeah, but the captain with her, the PR man, said, no, if she goes, I have to go. No way am I going out. Well, I bitched Mary about being in the line so long, and the men. And so I looked her up in Paris. I went and we were in a firefight when I got this message. And I left it in charge of Lieutenant Martin, and he had 3 other men with him. And you're in combat long enough, you get a feel for things, and it would feel like a snapover. Well, what the stupid bastard did is when they completed the action, the whole company went into a mansion, and they didn't put security out. The Germans counterattacked and set it on fire, and the men disappeared. The men literally scattered into the fields. When I came back from Paris, I had no company. And the battalion commander said, you know, if it's so tenuous that they'll only follow you, we think you need R&R. We're going to send you Riviera. I said, no, if the company goes, I'll go. Well, then they put a Captain Abbott in charge. And I said, fine, I'll be his exec officer. And Abbott said, no, they're not going to pay attention to me. They're going to pay attention to you. So that's an untold story to anybody. But well, eventually they found out I came back and they reassembled. And what I did, we got drunk as skunks for 2 days, Van Dyck and I, and we came back to the lines. We're ready to fight again. We needed it. We needed a change. But as I said, my wife thought I was, next thing you know, she thinks I'm an R&R, and she gets that MIA telegram. Oh, when I saw Mary Hemingway, she was a stringer for Time magazine. And I said, what do they have to do with your story? And she said they wouldn't print it. It was bad for the morale of the people back home. It's the same thing they're doing now in Iraq. They're just giving us the good news. And am I going too far afield?
No, that's fine. So I guess one of the last things I wanted to ask you about, you know, the whole Lost Battalion incident is really if you could describe for me maybe that last day, what was that like, and also, you know, when you know that they finally broken through.
The last day, the Germans made their strongest counterattack. And Eddie H. Sharma, when I was giving the speech, he had invited me, he was running the show, 522. He asked me, what did you think of these little, I don't know, these slant-eyed, sort of deprecating the men. And I said, they looked like giants to us. And they did. Well, as I said, Eddie Guy was in the hospital. He was one of my closest, he was my rock. And he recognized who they were. And we had heard about them. And we were just, in fact, men cried. They gave us cigarettes. And I don't know when they took that picture of me coming out with the beard. And I said this before, and I say again, the 2 men in the picture had absolutely nothing to do with the rescue. They were echelon people. And again, I didn't know they took a picture. The BBC took a broadcast, made a record for me. Not for me, but they gave it to my mother and wife. And it was one of those, what they call those old records, the 78s, whatever, vinyl, I don't know what they were. They'd break. At some point, my son converted it to one of these discs, I think, or whatever, or cassettes. And bring me back to the question.
Well, I guess so. So on this last day, you know, meeting the 100th and 442, what was that like? I mean, can you describe, you know, also, since I know you were talking about how they didn't get credit, if you could also mention the fact that it was the 100th and 442. And, you know,
I don't think the 100th was involved in the rescue. I think it was just the 442. I don't think the 100th was involved in that. I could be wrong, but I don't think they were.
Oh, well, actually, the 100th was actually part of the 442.
Yeah, I know that, but I don't think they were. The 100th kept their battalion insignia from Italy. Mm-hmm. But I don't think the 100th per se were involved. I think it was the 442 battalion,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or the regiment, RCT they call it. Actually, I can just say we're elated. Combat makes you a different person. You're accepting death. I had men die in my arms, and you just leave them. I had one of my men with a hole in his back, and you leave him for the medics. You don't stop fighting. So, well, I should say we were thrilled and all that. We were thrilled and all that. But we didn't realize the significance of it. I can't quite get that across to you. We were fighting, and they came in and rescued us. We didn't have the vaguest idea, not the vaguest, what they lost. And that's hard to get that across to you.
I guess,
You see that one, again, I said this before, that the highlight of their unit was our rescue. The highlight of my life in combat was the capture. So we're coming from different places here.
Oh, definitely.
But I'm speaking honestly now.
No, definitely. No, and I understand because, I definitely appreciate you telling us about that. I guess the one question that I had in my mind was, I think, some people wonder is, since you've already talked about how they weren't really, recognized, at the time, I was kind of curious, like, what interaction you had, if any, and I know you had said you had heard things about the 100th and 442, what you knew about them then, and just that brief interaction, what that was like at that point, because I know right away you guys are going back to the line, and you guys are back fighting again, and so I was just trying to get an idea, from your standpoint, of what that moment was like just then.
Well, the moment was great, and as I said to Ed Giamma, they didn't like little people, they looked like giants to us, and they were. And as I said before, I never discriminated about size or color or whatever. And all I knew, they were a hell of a brave group of people to don't get us out. If you figure when our own people, our own division couldn't get us out. Now I know Senator Inouye figures Dahlquist sacrificed the Japanese Americans to save us Texans. I sincerely feel that Dahlquist knew that they were a stronger unit than our division at that point. You follow what I'm saying? No one seems to recognize the fact of the casualties we had up until then. I don't like to leave it like that, but give me another question.
Okay. Okay. Well, since you were talking about Dahlquist, could you actually just, tell me a little bit more about, your impressions of Dahlquist?
I liked him. I'm not supposed to, but I did. He was an upfront leader. I wouldn't have liked him if I was with the 442. But I liked the way he was upfront. He was a very brave man. In a way, I know Colonel Critchfield thinks it was stupid. Well, for example, you can fight a company two ways. You can lead them or push them from the rear. I led. Harry Hubert led. Joe Kimball pushed. Division and battalion commanders should not be up in the lines to get exposed. You follow what I'm saying? But when they do it, it's a tremendous, how can I put it? It just makes the men fight harder. They shouldn't be doing it. And I shouldn't have done things I did. But the men respected me for it. I respected Dahlquist. I thought he was a hell of a good man. I could see why the Japanese Americans hate his guts. But I see it from a different point of view. Any other questions? I shouldn't like it, but I did.
No.
I know Colonel, there was somebody's son was his executive,
Sinclair Lewis's son?
Yeah. And I know Colonel Critchfield, people blamed him for having this guy killed. And war isn't like that. You don't, this has nothing to do with it, but let me explain something to you. Before I took over the company, Lieutenant Daughtry had it. And we were in an attack with division support, the heavy artillery. And all the company commanders were up at a consultation. And we had one gun short, and it decimated all of the officers up there. Well, I didn't know what to do. I remember the line, and I was not in command. I said, turn around in place. And I was leading them out. And this colonel came around, a full colonel, I don't know who the hell he was. And he said, where are you going? I explained to him, I said, they were shot up by one artillery, and I'm leading the men back. You get those goddamn men going in the other direction. Well, just then, some shells came in. And when you're in combat long enough, you know whether they're coming and going over. He and his captain hit the ground. They looked up, and I was standing there. They said, go ahead and do what you were doing. No, you're in combat. You can sense things. You can sense when, well, again, no one tells who should die and who should live. Let me leave with some kind of a good answer for you.
I guess, another question I know Robert had here had to do with the shells with supplies, that the 522 was sending over.
Well, they sent in D-bars. They were relatively limited what they could send in, but it all helped. It helped our morale. And the men were absolutely fantastic. And again, this is in the speech. When I asked to distribute everything, one guy even had a sterno stove. And they cut trees down. I think that's in the speech with penknives. And the thing that amazed me is the morale, bad as it was getting, the morale of the men was up. And I'm not taking any credit, but I think that amounts to leadership. Someone asked me, what's the important quality of a leader? You know what my answer was? Decisiveness. You tell the men to do something. You don't stand there looking puzzled. When I joined this platoon, Sergeant Jenkins was my platoon sergeant. I thought, this guy's going to resent the hell out of me coming in and take over. He loved the idea. He loved to get rid of the responsibility. And all the men are looking for is the lieutenant, the commanding officer, tell them what to do, wrong or right, what to do. And that to me is the definition of a leader, decisiveness. Great. Did I do it?
No, that's great. That's great. So, do you guys have any more questions on this? Otherwise, I'm just gonna.
Dahlquist's general reputation and the idea of the first to go into Germany.
Okay, well, I guess one of the questions, since we know how you feel about Dahlquist, and I guess maybe hearing your take on how you felt about because he had a bit of a reputation of wanting to be the first to push into Germany, and I guess some people felt like he was pushing like the 141st.
I can consider that.
I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that, because that.
I never gave that any thought about pushing. All I knew, and while our lieutenant was Colonel Byrd, the battalion commander, and he was another gung-ho guy. He'd been hit and a couple of times, and I never knew. You see, in combat, you don't know the big picture. You know your objective, the next objective. It never occurred to me about where we were going. All I knew is, in the first place, I can honestly say this, I thought taking that hill was the dumbest goddamn thing I ever did. We did not have a field of fire. I don't know why the Germans held us there. And I don't know whether you ever read, what's his name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, I may think of it later. The tip of the guy that was quite an author. Anyway, he said that in many, many cases, thousands of men were lost. And objectives, both the Germans and the Americans, had absolutely nothing to do with the war. They were just misdirected. I think that whole Befontaine thing was a big, big mistake. Somebody looked at a map. This is the way I felt, and said, oh, this would be a good place for observation to take. We had none. It overlooked some of the villages down below, but I think the entire mission was a big blunder. And if you can think of the guy who wrote Citizen Soldiers, that's the guy I'm trying to think of.
I can't think of it.
Well, it may come to it. He just died, and he's written about 5 or 6 books.
Now, I'd actually read in Franz Steidl's book, he mentioned something about at one point prior to, becoming, in the Lost Battalion kind of situation, that, your company had actually, crossed through, through past, because you were pretty close to the 442K company. I was just curious if you guys had any interaction.
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay. Then,
no, we didn't know them until the tail end. As I said, it was the strongest German attack we had. And when they broke, fortunately, someone recognized them as the 442, and we didn't fire on them, which is a blessing. And to see these guys coming from, granted they were little, but God, they were tough. They were tough. And it killed me when I came back and read their losses. It killed me. And I still don't see any justification for it, for the target even. The unique part about it, my son-in-law and daughter sent me to France, marching me to France for 1989. You wanted to drop off this because it's far afield. Well, anyway, the original plan was to fly to Paris, stay there 2 days, drive down the Riviera, and follow the division up. Well, Marge and I fell in love with Paris, so instead of going all the way down to the Riviera and coming up, we cut over through Lyon and the Vosges Mountains, where the heavy fighting was, as far as I was concerned. The only day it rained out of 2 weeks was in Sigelsheim, where I was captured. And I went to the building, the house that I was firing from, and it had a solid wall. I remember firing through a window downstairs. So I went back and saw it. It was the only, we couldn't stay in Sigelsheim. We couldn't get a motel near there. So we went into, well, anyway. I found out later from Peter Oosterman, who's got the reenactment group, they had leveled the entire town, and the 3rd Division took it. And the people rebuilt the town, so the house that I was in was destroyed. They built a new house. But then they credit the 3rd Infantry. War is crazy as hell, let me tell you that. And as I started to say earlier, the human mind has a way of dismissing unfavorable, I think, except for those people that go psycho. They end up with, what do you call it? PST.
PTSD?
Yeah.
So now, after the war, I know you returning back to your wife and, starting a family. I know you told me, how with your children. Can you actually tell me, a little bit more about your children, Michael and Missy, like just their names and...
Well, I worked for the Russell Playing Card Company. Well, first of all, let me explain that a little bit. I went for an interview by this employment agency to Edmund Rosenthal. It was the Russell Playing Card Company. Now, they were a division of the U.S. Playing Card Company, and there was another division consolidated with 3 divisions. They had 3 separate offices, different floors, 3 different sales offices, 3 different headquarters, but all the cards were made in Cincinnati, Ohio. So if a customer got miffed with one of the companies, they thought they would take buying from one of us, and it was all right. Well, Edmund Rosenthal, we had 7 salesmen in the country, and each man had his own deal with Edmund. I was sent for the first year to St. Louis, and they had no account. They had damn few accounts out there as a learning process. And I would travel a month at a time and come back. I made 4 trips down to Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, and my wife traveled with me. Well, we wanted children, and one of us, I can't remember which it was, found out we couldn't. So we went to an adoption agency, and we went to St. Vincent's Hospital, and there was a sister, Mary Margaret, who was supposed to be blessed with picking out children to match the the adoption people. And so both children picked for us before they were born. Well, Missy was born in 1949. We got her after 2 or 3 weeks. And in the meanwhile, I haven't said this to anybody, in 1950, Marge went through one of these TB clinics, you know, the mobile things, with a neighbor. And she was told to come back. They found something. So she went back, and it ended up she had TB, and they were treating her. And she wasn't getting any better. Oh, and then we didn't want one child. And we figured if we tell these people Marge has tuberculosis, they'll never give us another one. So we didn't say anything, and we got Mike. He was about 6 weeks old. And then I sent them home to New Jersey, and we knew a doctor there in Jersey City, and it was a medical center, TB institution in Jersey City. John Hamill was his name. And they were treating something that was not the real menace. It was something that she had a lobe beam. I was in Kansas City. I figured she's in good shape. And she called me on the phone and said, I can't get out. They're going to remove a lobe for me. You know, there were 5 lobes in the lungs. Well, I was very upbeat and hung up and cried like a baby. So Edmund Rosenthal, whom I really admired, he transferred me back to New Jersey because of Marge and sent another guy to Chicago. So she was in the hospital for a year. And I would take the kids, Margaret Haig Maternity Hospital, well, it was near that, and they'd wave to their mother. And she came through with such flying colors. She was used as the role model for the surgery. And the men suffered more relapse after the operation because they thought this was the end. And anyway, my in-laws raised my kids for a couple of years. And then finally, I decided to buy a house in Demorest, New Jersey. Oh, I forgot to tell you a significant part about it. I was discussing names with Edmund Roosevelt, the president. And he said, you know, you might have to have a certain amount of money in your bank account. And he said, if you need $10,000, let me know. Oh, I forgot this part, too. When I came out, the option was teaching, law school, or sales. And in 1946, I said, to Edmund, what kind of money will I be making? He said, about $10,000. Now, not then, but eventually. $10,000 in 1946 was one hell of a lot of money. The men that were making that had lived in the best country clubs. It was a lot of money. Big money was $25,000. And anyway, I said to Edmund, if I get a girl, or boy, I'm going to change his name to Michael Peter Higgins. Every place you go would be 40 mph, you know, miles per hour. And he said, what about if it's a girl? I said, well, he said, how about Mary Pat Higgins? I said, fine. So she's mph. And then they changed the damn signs to speed limit. So anyway, we went back to New Jersey, and eventually, after about 10 years, the companies were all merged together. And then about 5 years after that, we were taken over by Diamond International. And I ended up with just having New Jersey. And I think there was one point, we used to have a company car, my own car. I had convertibles. And they said, don't buy another car, should we? You're going to have to get a company car. And they said, they wanted to put me a district manager in New York, and I didn't want headquarters, because I ran my own hours, left when I wanted to, came home when I wanted to. So I went in that. And then I had 9 salesmen, and I had a ball with them. And then the sales manager went out to Cincinnati. I became sales manager in the East Coast. I don't know how far to go with this. Shall I continue in this direction or just drop it off?
It depends on what you feel comfortable with. And
do you have enough now?
Well, okay. And some of the other basic questions that we usually ask
That's what I want to
is, could you actually tell us a little bit, in terms of your grandchildren, like, maybe how many grandchildren you have, their names? I have Mary Pat and Michael. Mary Pat Abrunzo is my daughter. Michael Higgins is my son. My son-in-law is Dr. Thomas Abrunzo.
He emergency pediatrician, and he worked for almost every emergency hospital in the Tampa area. Then he and his partner formed an urgent care center, and he developed 4 different urgent cares, 2 in Tampa, 1 in Ellington, 1 in Brandon, and they've been bought out by another company, and they made enough money on the buyout to retire. But I think they've got 2 more years to complete it. My son had a miserable marriage, 1 child as a result of it. His wife left him after 2 years, and Michael just remarried 2 weeks ago. He's got a good one this time. My grandchildren, Nikki is the one I mentioned, Nikki Malia. She's doing a residency in Chicago now, her first residency. She couldn't even get home for Mike's wedding, but she was able to come home the day after. She can't come home for Christmas. She had a choice of Thanksgiving or Christmas. And my grandson graduated from Sewanee University, and he's now in Florida State Law School. And they're both brilliant, handsome kids, and I'm blessed.
What is your grandson's name?
I beg your pardon?
Oh, your grandson's name?
He's Chris Abrenzo. My granddaughter is Nicole Malia Abrenzo, because she was born in Hawaii. Chris was born in Salt Lake City. He did a residency out there for a couple of years. Okay. Anything else?
And so are those your only grandchildren?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you talked to,
Oh, wait a minute. Hunter Higgins. Well, Hunter Higgins is my son's. I said his wife left him after the boy was 2. And it ruined my son because he was a port captain in Charleston when his wife left him with the baby. And I won't pursue this, but they're multi-wealthy people. So we had no way we could fight them for custody. Mm-hmm. And he was going to Atlanta so much to see his son from Charleston that they reduced his responsibilities, and he eventually lost his job. Mm. It really messed the kid up. Mm. But there's a girl he's married to now, Cynthia Purvis. She's a doll. They'll make it.
Great. Can we actually stop for a second? We're gonna we'll let Joe in. So, I guess the first question, like I was saying, is, have you ever talked to either your children or your grandchildren about any of your wartime experiences?
I never did growing up in Demorest, New Jersey. And the thing that brought the war back to me was Fun started writing a book. And because of him writing a book, I've had a lot of people get in touch with me by mail, post mail, or email, looking for their grandfathers, their sons, their brothers, whatever. And I generally can help them by feeding it off to some of the other guys in the company. And we go to reunions occasionally, and they're getting the crowd is getting smaller and smaller. They're dying by the thousands every day. There won't be many of us left shortly. And but I never. They really only learned about what I've been doing since 1995, because we were busy growing up. We just forgot about the war. Does that answer your question? Definitely. But now, when my daughter went to Hawaii with me, and she goes to reunions with me after my wife passed away.
And so, because this is being preserved for posterity, for future generations, there's a couple things. What would you like people to know about, your World War II experiences, and if you have any kind of advice or hopes for the future?
I have a very simple suggestion or explanation. Every generation does what it has to do. We had World War II. I would say we're 90% patriotic. I can't say the same thing for Korea or Vietnam or Iraq. I truly feel each generation what it has to do. Now, I think the people that protested Vietnam, I remember Mike was someone who was college, and I was going out to lunch with a couple of executives from the Cincinnati office, and neither one had been in combat. There were 2 of them. And I said, if my son wanted to go to Canada to conduct the war, I'd say, how much money do you need? I was totally opposed to it. I feel the same way about Iraq. They have to make their own decision. But the fact that they were not wars, not recognized as wars, I think is deplorable. It's just bad. It's a good analogy. It's like the Japanese Americans not being mentioned rescuing us, and it was probably one of the most noblest deeds in World War II. And to call Korea a conflict and Vietnam a conflict and denigrate them is completely wrong. I think the protesters were right. I still think they're right about Iraq. We didn't pursue diplomacy. If only people, I don't think any of the people in higher office, Wolfowitz, Cheney, Bush, Karl Rove, have a kid over there. If they did, they'd think about it differently. They never exhausted diplomacy. Let's bring it up to date as much as I can. And I truly say each generation does what it has to do. I was a lucky generation. Extreme patriot. And I remember coming home and saying, you know, Joe Keegan's working in the shipyards to duck the war. I didn't give a damn. This is me. At first I started joining the cavalry to ride horses. And then I'm a patriot to a fault. Even today, if I go to a parade and a flag goes marching by me with the drum of Yugoslavia, I tear. In fact, even when I was growing up, and the kids were growing up in Demorest, New Jersey, a band would come marching down with the American flag, and I'd tear. And I was I'm a very emotional person. Very emotional, and I play off emotions. And I just wish that every generation was as lucky as I am. Should we end it at that?
I just have one last question, because you did mention something. What would you like future generations to know about the contributions of the 100th, 442, the Japanese Americans who fought in World War II?
I think there should be some type of an avenue of either publication or recognition somehow. I don't know whether it would be TV, the websites, books, of the accomplishments of the 100th and 442nd. They were, what they did is, it's probably, they probably had the highest ratio of men killed in a regiment or in a small command. Of any, we had tremendous amount of casualties in World War II, but we were a regiment, a division. And I just feel that anybody that's been in combat should be recognized. Korea, it was a conflict. Vietnam, the minority groups, for example, now. I don't know where you stand in California on your voting and things like that, but the people should know. And I think it's up to the reporters, the commentators, to discriminate, to not disseminate this information. I think the world of you guys. And you weren't even thinking about combat. There's nothing I wouldn't do for a Japanese American. Or maybe a few things, but not in general.
So, because this is being used to actually educate people about the 100th and 442, is there anything particular that you think they should know about, anything that they did or your experience with them?
I think a biography of a number of the men that would distinguish themselves. For example, the 21 or 22 men that won the Congressional Medal of Honor. I think that should be included in some type of a textbook.
Right. Does anybody else have any other questions? No? So, okay, then on behalf of the Hanashi Oral History Program, I want to say thank you very much, Marty.
You're more than welcome.
For the interview.